always to help each of you find something that resonates and take that learning and turn it into action. So that's my challenge for you as you go through this course, to find something that really stands out, just one thing that you can do to start to take in action and make an impact in your organizations. So this program is a Force for Good Jobs for All, celebrating National Disability Employment Awareness Month. It's a celebration every October that recognizes the contributions of people with disabilities and promotes inclusive hiring practices. It was formed in 1945 by Congress, established the first week in October as National Employ the Physically Handicapped Week. It was modified to really include disabilities for all. And I think that what's important for me is most disabilities aren't seen. If you think about an iceberg, right, there's this part above the top. The majority of it is below. And we're interacting and interfacing with clients, with colleagues, with peers. And we don't know what's possible, what's in the room, what someone may need to create an inclusive workplace. And it's really important to be present and to ask those questions. So that's what I love about this celebration, is really a time to celebrate the contributions of everyone. I was thinking as I was leaving the Berkeley's Executive Education Equity Fluent Leadership class yesterday, and I looked out at the sunset over San Francisco, and it's all of these incredible colors, which makes it so beautiful. And I was thinking that's really what we're looking for in the workplace, isn't it? So without further ado, I would love to introduce these amazing speakers that we have joining us today. We have Kelly Dotto, who's principal at Fish Richardson and co-chair of the Enabled Affinity Group. Seth Gerber, who's IP partner at Morgan Lewis and co-leader of Disability Awareness Lawyer Network. And Sandra Yamate, who's the CEO of the Institute for Inclusion in the Legal Profession. And really grateful to you, Sandra, for partnering with us at ChIPs on so many of these incredibly important conversations. So I'd love to have each of you share what this NDEAM means to you. Sandra, we'll start with you.
To me, it means fairness and imagination and creativity and expansive enrichment. It means setting aside a lot of the rigid norms about what can be done and by whom in favor of greater flexibility and opportunity, as well as personal and professional growth. When I think about the people that I have been privileged to meet, work with, learn from, and become dear, trusted, and much valued friends, who also happen to have disabilities, I actually find myself feeling sorry for everyone who deprives themselves of the opportunity to experience seeing and thinking about the world differently. Um, it's kind of like the difference between the sound produced by a monophonograph, if anybody's old enough to remember phonographs, um, versus stereophonic sound, or old black and white televisions versus CinemaScope and now high definition. Um, if people with disabilities are not part of your circle of friends and colleagues, you are so missing out.
That was fantastic. Thank you for that, Sandra. Kelly?
Sure. So for me, this month is really emphasizing awareness and the acceptance of our colleagues with disabilities, both visible disabilities, which I think everyone recognizes and can obviously see, but also invisible disabilities like neurodivergence, cognitive impairments, other mental impairments. So I think that really it's awareness and acceptance of our colleagues who are facing these issues.
Thank you. Seth?
Sure. Thanks, Monica, and thanks for allowing me to participate in this great program. It's an important discussion. For me, this is really an opportunity to recognize the humanity of the people that we work with, so that we are treating each individual and our colleagues on a more personal level, in a sense that recognizes their authenticity as to who they really are, so that they're not necessarily feeling like they have to hide their personal struggles or challenges that they face in life. Because when people feel supported in the workplace, they become more loyal and they work hard and they feel as true participants in the workplace culture that you have. It's also an opportunity to recognize how much more we as a society have to do to include people with disabilities in the workplace, and also to allow people to feel more free to truly express who they are as individuals so that they're comfortable providing their perspectives into the sort of marketplace of ideas that we all work with.
Thank you for setting the stage with those really articulate introductions. Kelly, what does it mean to empower, normalize, and back legal employees with disabilities?
So I'm smiling because you use the words empower, normalize, and back. And as you introduced me, I am the co-chair of Fish's Enabled Group, which stands for empowering, normalizing, and backing legal employees with disabilities. So you took the words right out of my mouth. I think empowering employees means giving them the tools to advocate for themselves, whether that's seeking accommodations in the workplace or simply being upfront about who they are and the challenges that they may face. To me, that's empowerment. Normalizing is a key function of our affinity group's firm-wide presentations. It's education-based and it's increasing awareness of the contributions of persons with disabilities that they make to the diversity of our practice and the legal profession as a whole. And then backing is a key element too. It's cultivating a safe place to provide peer-to-peer support regarding disability issues and advocating for an accessible and supportive workplace.
Great, thank you. And Seth, Morgan Lewis is actually the first law firm to meet the Diversity Labs criteria for inclusion for all, including disabilities, which was new this year. So congratulations to the firm on that and the efforts that you and the firm have made to make that possible. And I put in the chat a link to the Disability Labs 10 commitments for inclusion across disabilities. So I hope that all of you will read that and understand how that can support you. Seth, how is the role of the Disability Awareness Lawyer Network in shaping inclusive employment practices?
Sure. Well, Morgan Lewis has really set the standard in doing this, and I think what they're achieving with respect to disability awareness is quite remarkable. For one, there are many of us who are involved in the network that are very open and self-identify with our disabilities. For many years in prior law firms, I didn't wear an eye patch. I lived in daily pain due to my vision problems, but I don't feel that way anymore. And so I feel very comfortable at this firm being who I am. And I think what that has created is not just what I do, but all the members of our network. We've created a culture where people feel that they can discuss their disabilities or challenges, which once their colleagues become aware of that, they are better able to work with them. If I've had an associate disclose to me he has a hearing disability, for example. So being aware of that, which I wouldn't have never known about unless he disclosed that to me, it allows me to make sure that he can actually hear what's going on in our Zoom sessions or when we're in court together to speak more slowly and to accommodate those disabilities. So we've created that sort of open culture where people can be their authentic self. But we also put on programming at Morgan Lewis, and I think it's really important for businesses and law firms to do this, to actually take proactive steps to educate your colleagues about disability issues, whether that's substance abuse problems or issues that may pertain to being a caretaker, to an elderly family member, or if you have a child with neurodiversity or autism. We put on programming to help people better understand how to address some of these issues so that they feel supported in the workplace and they can function better in their job because they are actually learning more about how to address some of these issues and they don't feel sort of lost in overwhelmed by work and not really able to focus on these very important aspects to their life. So we do that as well. We also partner with our clients and look at what our clients are doing in this space to make their workplaces more diverse. But many of our clients also participate or have connections with certain organizations that are in the disability space. And we try and pair up what we're doing with what our clients are doing to foster these relationships so that we're working in tandem to achieve a more diverse workplace overall.
I love what you've shared. It sounds like the symbol of your eye patch created a safe space for other employees to come forward and say, "Hey, I have a disability that I want to talk about," and just
Yeah,
giving them that space.
there's no question that once you are open with your disability, that as a more senior attorney, people will come up to you and ask you what happened, or tell you about their medical problems, and so forth. And that creates a better, deeper connection with your colleagues, which make us a stronger team. And once you understand who you're working with on a deeper, more human level, then we're able to work for our common purpose in our cases together.
I imagine there could be a lot of shame in the feeling of being in the legal industry, being in a law firm, being in house counsel, and being concerned, having fear around discussing disabilities. And I know that in the legal industry, it is common that a lot of disabilities don't get reported because of that. So I think it's really just a great culture that Morgan Lewis has created to allow that to be possible. I know, Fish, that you've done the same thing. Sandra, I'd like to turn it to you. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the overlooked factors in making workplaces truly inclusive for people with disabilities?
Sure. I think it's important to bear in mind that, as the old saying goes, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Although I'm not sure why anyone would want to skin a cat, but okay. We need to stop assuming that just because someone isn't going to tackle a task or an assignment the way we would, that automatically means they aren't doing it correctly or that they can't do it. I'm constantly delighted when I find, for instance, that the people with whom I'm working can show me a better a better way to do things, a different way to think about things. Um, I think we also need to stop setting up what I'll call bias-based obstacles to make things harder for some people than others. Before the pandemic, when hardly anybody in our profession was using video conference platforms like Teams or Zoom, there are certainly plenty of people who are working remotely. Think of all the straight, cis, white, male, large law firm partners with practices that required them to be frequently traveling away from their home office. They could set up in a remote office or work off their laptop in a hotel room, and nobody questioned their commitment to their careers or their ability to get their work done. But for a parent with young children who might find it beneficial to work from home some days, or someone with mobility disability who might find it more convenient to work remotely, all sorts of questions about their commitment and ability get raised. Now, I think with the experiences and lessons from those things should not be such an issue, but that the emphasis upon a return to work and those policies, it's starting to create one. There are certainly valid reasons why it's good to have people back in the office at the same time so that relationships might further flourish. But we shouldn't make it about an ability to work or commitment to career. We need to bear in mind that there's lots of ways that we can accomplish these goals. And the messaging that, this is the such and such law firm or company, this is our way of doing things, maybe that's not really healthy. Maybe there have to be multiple ways of doing things. Um, and we need to just bear that in mind.
Are there strategies that we can share to call out to the people listening to allow them to create ways to increase impact in their organizations that would make it easier for return to work, for example, regarding mobility or other policies that you have specifically seen or been part of shaping? That's to Sandra or to any of you.
I feel like I've been talking a lot, but
No, please.
I'll I'll continue. I think that some of the policies need to be built around why and what's going to be going on, um, so that it makes it easier to prioritize why we're returning to the office. If we're doing it just because we think we should, that's one thing. But if we're doing it in order to foster actual opportunities for people to be interacting with each other in a way they might not normally do, um, via Zoom or Teams, then I think that's good too. I think that having those conversations, and for people with disabilities, it might actually be ideal if the structure of return to work, return to the office is designed to foster those opportunities. Because again, I think a lot of times people miss out on better understanding and being more able to be inclusive around disability diversity for ignorance and lack of exposure. So if there's a way to foster those opportunities when you're doing a return to the office policy, I think that's great.
Seth, Kelly, anything to add? Strategies, policies that you've
Yeah.
initiated, implemented to make that process more inclusive?
Sure. Well, I just think it's really important that, flexibility, when you're dealing with employees who may be going to doctor's appointments or being a caretaker or a parent of someone with a disability, the flexibility that we have now with remote working in many businesses, not just law, has been a huge benefit. And I think that helps bring a more inclusive work environment because it is easier now for a parent of a disabled child who may have to, run off to school and pick up their kid due to an issue at school or attend an IEP meeting or go to their own medical appointments or their kids' medical appointments. The flexibility offered by remote work is a huge benefit for employers because it allows employers to be more inclusive in the sense that it's easier now to accommodate people with disabilities or caretakers or parents of people with disabilities because everybody's working remotely to a certain extent and it is so widely adopted now. That has been, I think, a significant benefit for the disabled community.
Yeah. Kelly, can you share some specific instances where inclusive hiring or promotional practices led to unexpected benefits for Fish and some of the specific design policies that you developed to accommodate the diverse needs of employees?
Sure. So we're actually seeing a great increase in the number of clients who are expecting diverse teams. And that's diversity across all different levels, gender, race, disabilities as well. So even getting in the door with a client for a pitch or an RFP, you have to identify who your team is going to be, and they are no longer happy seeing, 5 cis white men on the team. So that is one way that diversity is driving the creation of diverse client teams, and it only helps the teams themselves with diverse thought, as we all know. Fish is working both from the top down and the bottom up on design policies that accommodate the needs for individuals with disabilities. So an example of the top down approach, you mentioned the Mansfield rule, I believe. So Fish has again earned the Mansfield rule certification. This certification ensures that at least 30% women, attorneys of color, LGBTQ plus attorneys, and lawyers with disabilities for leadership roles, equity partner promotions, formal client pitch opportunities, and senior lateral positions. You have to make that 30% mark. And Fish has achieved Mansfield certification each year since the recognition was created in 2017. And it routinely exceeds that 30% threshold in these practices. So holding ourselves to this standard ensures that opportunities for advancement are transparent and inclusive for everyone. But we've also signed on to Diversity Lab's disability inclusion commitments, which features 10 actions that firms can take that are proven to broaden inclusion for people with disabilities. And one of these action steps is increasing opportunities to hire disabled people. Through this initiative, we have access to knowledge sharing and other resources to raise awareness in the wider legal community. So that's from the top down, making sure that our leadership roles really reflect the diversity of the entire population. And from the bottom up, that's really where our enabled and affinity group is working hard. We have our group that alerts for management to policies that perhaps have an unintended adverse impact on legal employees with disabilities. For example, our firm, like many others, had a health initiative where it was a STEPS initiative how to get, 10,000 steps in a day. And they did allow you to set your own personal goal. So maybe your goal wasn't 10,000, maybe it was only 2,000. But one thing that they did was for those people who may not be able to take even 2,000 steps a day, they had alternative activities, even things like Tai Chi, yoga, housework that you could convert into steps so that you could still participate in the challenge. And I think pushing initiatives that aren't physical, but also Fish has mental challenges as well, encouraging mindfulness, instructing on meditation, things that don't require a physical element, also improve inclusion here at Fish.
I know from all the research that EAP programs are incredibly underutilized. And I wonder, and so often employees who are stressed and time constrained, which is most of our workforces, will say, you want me to stop and take a yoga class for an hour or go to an optional continuing education program like this one we're having right now, right? How do you make it even more accessible? And maybe that's a loaded question because really I'm thinking, do you find ways to integrate these opportunities within this construct of work so that it's not work plus, but included in like work and this is the work that we're doing together as a team to create these inclusive cultures, to make the conversation be part of your day so that it's not an additional expectation on top of everything else when the demands are so rigorous.
So Fish, obviously as a lawyer, we are very often concerned with the billable hour and getting your billable hours in. So I really applaud Fish for giving what is called diversity, equity, and inclusion credit, which is treated like a billable hour essentially. And attending a program that we just hosted earlier today by the Enabled Group on neurodiversity in the workplace, for example. You can bill that as diversity, equity, and inclusion credit. And so it's taking up part of your day, but you're getting credit for it. So I really think that is very helpful for those of us who are, actually for all of us who are strapped on time with the demands of the job and life.
Mhm. That's Sandra, anything you're seeing to make it even more accessible to have these conversations or to allow for well-being? No? Okay. Um, Seth, Sandra, what does allyship look like in the space of disability inclusion, and how can organizations better support allyship?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, that was for Sandra.
Oh, Sandra, go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, now, Seth, if you want to jump in, go
No,
ahead.
no, you first, please.
I was just going to say that I think it's burdensome and it's exhausting when you have to constantly and continuously advocate for yourself. Um, we certainly see it with people of color when they are oftentimes put in the position of having to speak for all people of color at any given time. It's that added tax upon who you are. And I think it's critical that more people become better educated about how to be better allies. And some of it is just simple education. If we can normalize allyship standards, I think it's better for everyone. Um, for instance, as a profession, we do a lot of networking receptions. And if you've got event planning staff, you can educate them about the needs and requirements of a wider range of attendees than they might be consciously thinking about. You can explain that, a buffet might be easier, but uh, is it really? Because what provisions are being made for someone who is unable to maneuver with a cane or crutches or a wheelchair while balancing a plate? Um, or that, yeah, the reception area, they might think it looks so cool just to have high tops and, low light by candles. Um, but is that really going to be the right option for people who might need to have seating or those who don't see as well in low light? Or it's just people who can't stand for a long periods of time. Or as I was recently brought to my attention at one bar convention I was at, not everybody is, 40 years old. As we have more and more baby boomers, even, sometimes you just need a little bit more assistance and accommodation, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so the more we're sensitive to just how diverse our population really is, I think it just stands us in good stead as allies.
We have 5 generations in the workplace right now. The first time this has ever been the case in our history as a country. And we're seeing so many more dimensions show up in the workplace. And I love what you just shared, Sandra, because this is what we experience every day. And if we're not understanding the dynamics of who is in the room and what opportunities we can provide, then we're missing out on the smartest people in the room, really.
Well, people forget that, the Americans with Disabilities Act has a very broad definition of what's considered a disability. And it's more than just the stereotypic, someone who might be blind or have low vision or someone who is deaf or hard of hearing. There's lots of ways that disability manifests, and disability is one of those categories that, unlike race, you can become a member of the disability community at any point in your life.
That's right. Yeah. Seth, how do we shift the mindset from seeing disability as a limitation to viewing it as a valuable perspective in the workplace?
Well, I view disabled people as in quite in quite a similar way as Kelly's firm describes it, as being enabled, but even more so in the sense that disabled people who are in the workplace or want to be in the workplace have overcome challenges, and so they bring a certain level that you don't normally see with those who have not necessarily faced those hurdles. So, it really opens your mind to the differences that everybody brings to the table and whatever their background has given them in life. Most people have had certain challenges in life, and disability is just one of many, and it can happen very suddenly, as it had with me, or it can be something you're born with. But virtually everybody in life is going to face some sort of medical problem or disability, or will just get older and suffer, declining health as they age. And so this is an issue that touches all of us. We're all human beings. We're all going to encounter these challenges, and it may be a very sudden change, something you didn't anticipate. It may be you have a child, and your child at 4 you think is a perfectly beautiful little baby ends up having a certain disability or being neurodiverse, and that manifests at 4 or 3 years old. There's a lot of things in life that happen unexpectedly, and people who have encountered these challenges and overcome them and continue to work and want to work, they want to be there for a reason. You'll have a more loyal employee, a person who brings enormous strength and perseverance to the workplace and a different perspective, which really adds to the creativity of your overall work environment, because they're going to bring a different viewpoint to the table. And that's not just words. They will have a different viewpoint in how they see challenges, the internal skills that they've utilized to overcome them in life to be where they are.
Our chipster, Karina Kachatourian, says fairness is a policy of one, right? That each employee comes in and has a designed workplace environment for that person. And I hear that in what you're saying, Seth, which I think is fantastic. I'd love to hear a little bit more, Kelly, about the enabled group that you've developed, and then also how affinity groups are positively impacting employees, and I know it takes a lot of work to keep these active. So what is it that you're doing to help and really to allow our listeners to identify ways to create a group, whether they have one or not, and how to keep it active and to connect to employee engagement around the affinity groups?
I think people, through their participation in our enabled group, feel seen in their disability. So we don't ask anyone why they join the group or what their disability is, or even why they're there. We extend an invitation firm wide, and whoever joins is welcome. But I've seen as our monthly meetings progress, as our conversations get deeper, that people are opening up and sharing what their disability is. This is a lot of invisible disabilities. It could be something like gastrointestinal issues, neurodiversity. There's just, as Sandra mentioned, there's a very broad definition of disability. So they feel seen, and it's creating twofold. They recognize themselves in the legal workplace because they see others are facing similar issues as themselves. And it's creating mentorship opportunities. Our enabled group crosses attorneys and legal staff. So you may not interact with the person from our San Diego office because you, like me, are based in Delaware, but you might be facing similar debilitating anxiety. And now you can talk to each other about how you handle that in what's a very stressful job. Similarly, if you have physical limitations, you can mentor and you've sought accommodations, you can mentor someone through that accommodation process, which might seem a little intimidating to someone who's never had to go to, for example, HR. So I think feeling seen and feeling a sense of acceptance, as well as providing the possibility of mentorship, is really helpful. And to keep our group active, we meet on a monthly basis. And I always put out an icebreaker ahead of time so that people who need a little more time to process or to think and get comfortable with their response are willing to participate. And we really engage in things like TED Talk book club, where we'll watch a 10-minute TED Talk on the screen together so it doesn't take into your lifetime. And then we dissect it and talk about what really resonated with us. And there's so many great TED Talks out there on disability in the workplace, disability in life, and how to handle not only the challenges they bring, but I like to think the superpowers they bring as well. Because people with disabilities are they've had to be creative problem solvers, especially in the legal workplace, to get to where they are.
Seth, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, we do a lot of the similar things. We have programming that we regularly put forward. So we've done firm-wide programming on well-being issues through adversity, which really focused on substance abuse, which is a big topic for lawyers, with 30% with alcohol issues or depression, with similar statistics. So we've done well-being presentations. We've also had individual offices that sponsor disability awareness type programming. So our Paris office, for example, has put on a sign language workshop. Our London office has done neurodiversity awareness luncheon. So that kind of programming is really important to bring attention to these issues and to keep people very active in the disability group. And we also hold regular meetings. In our firm at Morgan Lewis, we also, as Kelly does with her firm, we are a member of the Disability Inclusion Commitments as well, and follow a lot of those similar goals in what we're trying to achieve with respect to creating a diverse and equitable workforce.
We practiced the Human Library Project at Berkeley's Executive Education Program yesterday. It was a lot of fun. Have any of you heard of this? The Human Library Project. So I encourage you all to check it out. It's something I'm going to be doing in my groups going forward. But so instead of borrowing a book, you borrow a person. It's not really borrowing, but people will come into this space and they'll have a word on a paper. And then you can ask them about that word, what it means to them, and really learning about someone instead of reading a book, getting to know someone through questions. And so we did this by writing down one word on a page, and then someone asks you, what does that mean for you? And I think it could be really impactful in a lot of ways, just to start to see each other beyond the day-to-day. And this can be done on Zoom, right? Remotely, in person. It's just really this fantastic way to name something and then to find out the meaning behind it for that person. It could be so many things, and it's It takes a lot of vulnerability too, and I think it could ultimately create more trust in our organizations by just seeing someone and what's important for them and
But that
their.
vulnerability is really, with lawyers, there's a sense that you need this perfect specimen of humanity to stand in front of a jury and argue the case on your behalf. But in reality, that vulnerability humanizes you with a jury or with a witness or a judge. And that's not a weakness. That is a strength. When they start seeing you as a person and not just, a hired gun out there, but they see you as a human being advocating for your client, and they connect with you instantaneously because you bring that vulnerability to the table merely because you are disabled, that is definitely not a weakness. And so we need to get past the stigma that being your authentic self, no matter what that means in your life, is somehow something that's negative or that puts you at a disadvantage. Being your authentic self is an advantage, period. It allows you to be a human being and to better convey your thoughts to whoever you're communicating with. And that is not a negative. And so differences is not a weakness. Differences can be a strength and something that's better. And it's really important for people to get that mindset. And they don't need to hide who they are as human beings, no matter what those differences are.
I love what you just said, Seth. I think that is so perfect. And Monica, I think I'm going to steal that human library idea. I like that very much.
I want to call an intersectionality to this conversation too. And we know about the high, like ridiculously high levels of anxiety, stress, depression, substance abuse within the legal industry. And it is not just lawyers, it is everyone connected to the legal industry. In the Legal Marketing Association report on anxiety and depression, the numbers are equally high. And that's because these are people working in this industry that expects perfection and expects this hyper-achieving mindset where no one's ever good enough. Imagine living with that every day. I'm not good enough. What I do doesn't matter. I can't show up my whole self. And we know also that it's really hard to have that vulnerability, Seth, unless you're at the most senior levels, because it's like, now I've made it. Now I can say I have this disability and no one's going to punish me because I've already shown that I'm good enough to belong here. Oh my gosh, that is so heavy. And so then any other intersectional identity that was layered on top of that makes it even harder. And I think this conversation, all of you are doing so much justice to this topic because you're making it a little bit easier. So I like, for anyone listening, I like to come to the tiny mighty, right? You may not be able to tackle this firm-wide or industry-wide, right? But can you tackle this with 5 people on your team? Can you say, I'm going to create this system so that the 5 of you, when we meet weekly, we can show up and support each other in however that might look, right? And maybe it's the Human Library Project. Maybe it's an icebreaker question. Maybe it's just watching. I love the idea of watching a TED Talk, Kelly. There are so many topics out there to help break down these big, big challenges so that it feels a little bit easier because it doesn't have to be so hard. And what all of you are sharing here is you did it, right? You're doing this, you're living it, you're being an example for someone else so that they can say, oh, I could be a little bit more like that too. Thanks, Emery, for that comment. If anyone else has a question, you're welcome to put it in the chat. I'm going to share the CLE form again here, and the CLE code is the word belong with a capital B. So if you want CLE credit, it's currently pending approval. And if you'd like another form, we can send you a certificate you can self-submit. So please use that form to share your feedback with the code belong. I have more questions, but if you have a question, please let us know. Sandra, what advice would you give to organizations that feel overwhelmed by the resources needed to implement these inclusive initiatives?
Well, after taking a private moment to wonder to myself why on earth they feel so overwhelmed, I would note that there are ample resources that are readily available. Um, just watching this webinar, for example. Um, Nowadays, it's so easy to do a quick search and find a lot of phenomenal resources, and you've put some of them in the chat already. Um, it would make me wonder that if they haven't had the initiative to find the resources themselves, well, I guess then they can ask. Um, but I would actually really suggest that you invest in building personal relationships with other people who can tell them and to do it in a very genuine and authentic way. So it's not just a question of, so tell me about, being blind. Like that's insensitive. But, as you get to know someone and you could ask questions in a respectful manner about how they might be getting things done that maybe you didn't understand.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Kelly, are you seeing any new developments or trends that you're particularly excited about?
Yes, so as Seth and I both mentioned, with the Mansfield certification, seeing law firms track and track metrics on lawyers with disabilities in positions of empowerment or leadership at law firms, I think is a really important trend that needs to continue. I also think you mentioned intersectionality. Uh, that's really important when it comes to affinity groups. I know Seth and I talked about this on a pre-call, but it's not just the disability affinity group. It's talking to the veterans group and talking about the intersectionality of issues they may be facing, such as PTSD and how they met that constitutes a disability and what accommodations or what resources the firm has to help them with that. It's talking to the parents group, both parents of children with disabilities or parents who are facing very high levels of anxiety and stress and working with them. So there's an intersectionality of affinity groups that I think is really important to foster. And then I'll mention it again, just recognition of neurodiversity. I think neurodiversity is so prevalent in both the general population and in the legal population as well. It's both a disability, but can also be an advantage. It brings very creative minds to the table. And understanding how our neurodiverse colleagues may think and approach a problem while differently, but in an effective manner, I think is just one more way to create an inclusive workplace.
I'd love to share a little bit more about that too, and welcome any ideas. But I find that so often we work in these fast-paced environments that doesn't make space for people who are internal processors. And finding a way to pause and then allow someone to reflect back. Or if you're always looking for feedback in the moment, you may not get the best work if you give people space to go back and think about it. And it takes a lot of preparation to create these spaces. So I honor that we maybe aren't always prepared for that, but it's our challenge to do a little bit better. I really love the work of Dolly Chug and her work. She has a TED Talk called Goodish, and a book as well on how we're all good-ish, right? We're human. So we make mistakes. So we can say, okay, I didn't realize, and this is a call for everyone. You maybe didn't realize that a process that you have or a policy that you have is negatively impacting people on your team. That's okay to recognize now that you can change it, right? That these aren't rigid policies or processes fixed in time. You can say, oh, and if you give people space to let you know how they want to communicate, right? If you ask 20 people their favorite communication style, you might get 20 answers. So just being aware of that, and then how can we do a little bit better?
So Monica, I just want to jump on one very tangible thing that I've done both in the enabled group and just on my case teams is the importance of an agenda. And I know that sounds really silly, but putting names next to who's going to talk on what and putting in questions that I have to the team so that they can actually think about it before the meeting and maybe come to the meeting with their thoughts. I think that allows those people who may not think on their feet as quickly or who maybe are those internal processors and don't feel comfortable just blurting out the first thing that comes to mind, that gives them more time to process and you have a more effective meeting.
And
Totally.
just picking up on these comments, I think education is really important. The more people understand about autism or ADHD or other neurodiverse issues, the better they are able to work with individuals like that, because there may be different ways of communication. Autistic people may take things more literally. They will be more direct in speaking their mind, quite typically. And so, just understanding somebody may be more literal can make a big difference in communicating with people, as well as, accommodating people with giving them more time to accomplish a task. We were talking about remote working earlier. That may be more conducive with working with people, with your colleagues who have ADHD, where it might take them longer to complete something, maybe a better work product at the end of the day, but it may take them a little longer. the more people understand these differences, the better they can benefit from the creative input that neurodiversity brings to the table. Some of the greatest inventions we all take advantage of in life in our society have come from neurodiverse individuals. And there's just a complete lack of understanding of the contributions of autistic people to our society. And we need to really make a much better effort in America in including neurodiverse individuals in our workforce. They're highly underrepresented, and the more awareness there is about neurodiversity, the better. I think it's great that we're seeing more shows, Love on the Spectrum, and all these individuals we like to watch on TV that we care about, we share laughs with, that we enjoy them. Well, we need to enjoy them not just on TV, we need to enjoy those individuals in our workplaces as well, and be much more inclusive in including them in our daily work life.
Mm-hmm. This next question might change in a week and how in terms of how you answer it, but I'm curious how you envision the next 5 years in terms of disability inclusion law in law firms or corporate environments. Seth, do you want to start?
Sure. I think we are, in an important point where diversity has been certainly very much highlighted in the past couple of years, and disability is just one of many affinity groups. And I view this all in a very positive trajectory. I'm very optimistic about the younger generations coming up. I think they have a much greater acceptance of differences and of people being authentic about who they are. And I'm very encouraged that in the future, we'll have even a far more inclusive work environment where people truly can be who they are without fearing that they're being stigmatized or that they'll be viewed in a negative way. But as a society, we'll view these differences as a huge benefit. And disabled people in the workforce bring a lot to the table, as I mentioned earlier: loyalty, a diverse perspective, the ability to persevere and overcome severe hardships. Those are some of the best workers you could ever ask for, and I'm very optimistic about the future generation coming up.
Me too. I have a lot of hope right now, and I think despite any formal policy, that the issues around fairness and inclusion are human issues, and the ability for each of us to see, to make sure that everyone is seen and heard is a human condition. And this is not based on whatever your workplace or federal policy says about what you have to do, because being a good person is something that we can all do.
100% agree.
Where are we going? What new developments and trends are you excited about? Kelly, do you want to start?
I think I know Seth and Sandra talked about this a little bit, but continued acceptance of work remote policies is a trend that I'm seeing across a lot of law firms, that some of them are refusing to go to full in-person mandates again. We proved through COVID that we can work remotely, and I think it is a very inclusive process to have remote work policies. If you think about someone who not only it's easy to see people with, for example, mobility issues, how it might be easier to work from home. But let's take someone who has maybe a more invisible disability, like a gastrointestinal disability. It's probably more comfortable for them to lay down after eating, if necessary, at their home rather than having to come into the office and navigate the comforts of that. So I think that there's definitely a balance that firms are grappling with the need for in-person mentoring and fostering those relationships, but continuing to have remote work possibilities is only going to be a great inclusive practice going forward.
When we talked about this on the prep call, I had allergies for I still have some allergies, but they're well managed. But for many years, I had to get weekly, by twice a week allergy shots. And I was lucky enough to live and work in Washington, D.C., where my doctor happened to be next door to the law firm. That's not common, especially if you live in an area that's more suburban, and it worked really well. I can't imagine having to do that where I live and work now. So the remote work also, COVID changed my ability to work as being a solo parent. And I think that's something that we don't always talk about, but it was really challenging some days. And the ability to set boundaries is a personal issue, but you can only go so far based on your employment policies. So you need the employer to meet you around those conditions so that you can really set boundaries that work for how you can show up.
Just picking up on what Kelly was saying, I agree. Remote work is a great way to accommodate in certain circumstances. And I also think alternative career tracks is also a good way to keep people in the workforce who may feel like they have to focus full time on their special needs kid and leave. I mean, lawyer retention is always a big issue, and so the more accommodations that can be made, the more people feel supported, that they feel like they're not alone, that they can continue to do their jobs, they can work remote when they have to, or they can slow down for a couple of years and work on an alternative career track while they're dealing with some medical crisis with a parent or something. And there's just so many ways we can keep people in the workforce through technology and awareness and acceptance. And I think these developments are very positive so that we don't lose employees or lawyers who feel like their disabilities or a family member's disabilities means they cannot contribute any further in the workplace. And I think there's a lot of ways to accommodate that now. And I think that the COVID changes in many respects have been very positive for disabled people in allowing them greater flexibility.
Seth makes a great point too about the technology, because I think that that has been such a huge cultural shift for society generally and the profession specifically, that the more familiar the legal profession becomes with technology and the advantages it brings, the less intimidated they are by sometimes the technology that is readily available and not cost prohibitive that might be needed to enable lawyers who have disabilities or others to function just as well as anybody else in the office.
Sure.
Um,
Take AI and how it can assist people with neurodiversity and just writing.
yeah.
And yeah, there's so many assistive technologies that are out there and that are being developed that really should bring more people into the workforce. And I think that's a wonderful development.
Yeah, technology for good. If you could introduce one initiative tomorrow to radically improve workplace inclusion, Sandra, what would it be?
That everybody at some point in their life, early on, preferably, experience um, what disability can be like. And there's so many different ways. I think too many people sort of saying, well, that's just for those other people. And like I said earlier, anyone can join this group at any time. So I think that if you begin to understand that it doesn't change fundamentally who you are, it doesn't mean that you can't do your job. It just means that you might do it differently or approach it differently. So I wish everybody could have that experience.
Thank you. Kelly?
I think I'd have to go back to remote work policies, but I'd echo what Sandra said. My advice to anyone on this topic would be disability can happen to you at any point in time. I was healthy and 31 years old when I became disabled. So it's not something that you have to be born with, and it's not something that you face necessarily in your later years. So having that recognition that it can, I don't think you need the recognition that it has to happen to you for you to want to help other people, but having that personal connection and recognition that, yes, this could be you one day, will just further integrate people into the need for helping people with disabilities in the legal profession.
Mhm. Seth?
just creating a culture of inclusiveness. And so whether it's a disability affinity group or some other affinity group, I think it's very important for people to get involved, even if they don't necessarily self-identify as a member of that group. Get involved, open your mind, and create that culture where people are curious about their colleagues and the lives that they lead and what they bring to the table. Get past viewing people at the surface level and really try and understand who your colleagues are as human beings, what challenges they've faced in life, and creating that culture of acceptingness, openness, and diversity is really important in any workforce. And that's what I would try and advocate for.
Thank you. Final question. What is one small change that individuals at any level can start to do today to contribute to an inclusive culture? So individuals within an organization or on their own or within their families. Kelly, let's start with you.
Sure. So whatever group you're a part of, whether it's an affinity group or just your team, share one thing about this talk that really resonated with you, a piece of advice, a story that we told, just to open the dialogue on disability awareness and inclusion, and show that you are a person who's open to talking about that. I think that's one very tangible thing that a person could do.
Seth, how about you?
It's as simple as asking people how they're doing, and just, finding out how people are doing. And some people may choose not to share what's going on in their life, and other people may open up to you, and then you'll get to know them better and you'll be better colleagues. So caring about the people you work with and making sure they understand that you care about them and how they're doing, their well-being, I think that's really important. I know when I've gone through numerous surgeries and challenges, it was my colleagues that reached out that had genuine care about how I was doing, not just physically with the surgery after surgery, but mentally and dealing with the stress or the anxiety or and the trauma of the procedures. Those people that express their concern, it really makes a huge difference and builds those bonds of loyalty, which are critical to success in the workplace.
Amazing. And Sandra?
I think it's treating ourselves and others with simple grace, kindness, and thoughtfulness. I think that simply alone would make things so much better.
Mhm. This has been a fantastic session. Kelly Dotto, Seth Gerber, and Sandra Yamate, thank you so much for being here. I'd like to leave you with a final thought, which is that you are not your title. You are not your job. You are not your ability or disability. As Sandra has so eloquently said, that can change at any moment. And I know that when these things change, it can lead to feelings of loss, feelings of also joy, right? It redefines who we are, but actually who we really are is much deeper than that. And so if we can give ourselves that grace and give each other that grace and that opportunity to be seen, how we show up each new day, that will take us a lot further in empowering everyone to have a good job for all across the entire ecosystem. So thank you all for being here. The CLE materials were shared in the chat. They're also on our community page in the ChIPs network. If you're not a member, please join. Share this with a friend. It will be on our YouTube channel, and I'll let you know once the CLE is approved. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.